Thank you for listening to the Music Production Podcast. We got a great show today with Derek Sivers. Before we get started, I just want to tell you about the Music Production Club. This is a subscription service I offer where you can get a steady flow of music production tools in your inbox. Right now, you're hearing a little jam I'm doing for the January 2020 challenge. And members of my Music Production Club will get all of the files, the projects, the presets I make in all of these jams. Head over to brianfunk.com/MPC to learn more about the club. And you can watch me live stream each one of these jams for the rest of January on youtube.com/brianfunkmusic. And I'm also posting the full finished track, or the finished jam anyway, at instagram.com/brianfunkmusic. So I hope you might check that out. And if you're enjoying the podcast, it'd be great if you could leave a review on your podcast provider. And now, enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome to the Music Production Podcast. My name is Brian Funk, and this is the show about all things about making music. Today, my guest is Derek Sivers. And Derek has played a major part in music, I'd say, in general. He created CD Baby, which is one of the ways I distributed an album back in the day. 2 albums, actually. He is an entrepreneur, musician. He was a former circus performer, author, writer, and I think someone that has a really great perspective on creativity and kind of following his gut and his heart and not necessarily listening to what people are telling him to do. And I think we are going to have a lot of fun talking about that. And he's also a very accomplished and trained musician. So we're going to learn some stuff about that too. So very excited to have you on here today, Derek. Thanks for joining me.
Cool. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, good to have you. I've followed your work for a long time. Various shows and podcasts, and read your book, which is Anything You Want. Definitely worth checking out. I appreciate your brevity and your thoughtfulness in how you approach things. And I'm excited to dive into some of the other stuff that I haven't really gotten a chance to hear a lot about. Of course, like your accidental creation of CD Baby is well documented. And I'm excited to hear about some of the other stuff that brought you to CD Baby in the first place and your music.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of why I'm here. I listened to one of your podcasts and really liked it a lot, then listened to a couple more, and I just really like what you're doing. And I really still think of myself as a musician first, and anything I did entrepreneur-wise came as like a side effect of being a musician. And it's funny, I feel like I got miscategorized after I sold my company. People thought I was a tech entrepreneur that just happened to do music the first time. But no, it was like quite the opposite. It was like, really, I was doing music and helping musicians. And then I kind of accidentally sold a company, or accidentally start and sold a company. So yeah, I'm much happier talking about music. I think I have much more in common with musicians than I do tech entrepreneurs.
Well, I think that's probably a lot to do with your success as a business person, because you created something that you thought you needed and you wanted. And the story goes, the friends kind of said, hey, can you put my CD for sale too?
Yeah.
And that's sort of like the most natural way, I guess, for a business to start.
Yeah. And I mean, let's face it, a lot of it was just really good luck and good timing. It was like 1997. The internet was just taking off. And so there were a lot of things. Like if you were a musician wanting to sell your CD at the time, there was no PayPal, there was no Amazon, there was no Bandcamp, there was no Sound, like none of it. There was literally no place on the internet, on the entire internet, that would sell your music, not a single one. And so like just a few weeks after I started my thing, if you were a musician trying to sell your music online, there was like the only way to do it was there was a guy named Derek in New York who could do it for you. So it was just really lucky timing. I don't think I can take that much credit as an entrepreneur. But yeah, the other stuff we could talk about here, people tell me I'm an unconventional thinker, but I think even that kind of grows out of the musician mindset, where you don't want to do what everybody else is doing. It's like, it's almost you're imperative, almost your mission as a musician to do what nobody else has done before. Like, unless you're just like a cover band in the Philippines or something like that, then you're trying to do something that nobody's done before. And so I think the same thing goes with everything else you do in life. So you look at it all like an experiment, a creative challenge. So, yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's being an artist, right?
Exactly.
If you're painting by numbers, you're kind of, it's not that interesting, but it's when you
right.
color
it can be good
outside the
practice.
lines. Sure.
It can be good craft, but yeah, the real challenge is to do what nobody's done.
You tap into an idea that I like to share with my students. I'm a high school English teacher by day. And one of the things that I remember myself being like kind of surprised by when I became like a teenager and started to become a young adult was that all of the adults in my life that were, or all the people, whether it's teachers, parents, or any sort of authority figure that would tell you what to do, were human beings just like me, then no smarter, just maybe a little more experienced. And I like to remind that idea to my students and tell them, listen, wisdom and experience is very important. You can learn a lot from it. But don't forget that we're all just kind of winging it here. There's no plan. Nice. And we're all just, I guess we'll do this. So the idea that there is like a prescriptive way to live life, I think is something that we all fall into very easily. It's a good thing to question what people are doing sometimes.
Yeah, even when you read like the masters disagree, meaning like I don't know, let's say like Socrates disagrees with Aristotle. Aristotle disagrees with Hayden or whatever. Just pick like any two philosophers from history that people consider both of them to be masters. They disagree with each other. So there's no one right answer. Unless we're talking like mathematics or something, there's no correct answer and wrong answer. It's all just different ways of approaching things. So musically too, I love, we can talk mostly about music itself, but just a little bit on the music business side of things. It's fun that even when you hear a rule in the music business, like touring is crucial, well, then there's plenty of examples to the opposite that prove that no, touring isn't crucial. Here's a long list of artists who have become incredibly successful without doing a live show. And if somebody tells you that, you're getting airplay or something like that is important, or having a great website, anything that people tell you is crucial, you can show plenty of examples to the opposite to show that it's not. So yeah, even the things you hear in business when people say you must do this and must do that, it's just one approach.
Yeah, it's true. And especially the way things change these days with the music business, for instance, or any kind of business, it's probably dangerous to do what people are doing all the time in the past.
Yeah. I mean, who knows? Maybe you want to keep 1 foot in expectations and 1 foot in trailblazing. But I guess now we're making another music comparison. If you do something musically that's like, I'm not even using notes, man. There's no notes. There's no rhythm. It's like, okay, well, good luck.
Yeah.
but probably the blend that will find you the widest audience and be creatively satisfying will probably be 1 foot in each. You have traditional song structures mixed with interesting instrumentation, or really well-crafted melodies mixed with interesting harmonies or textures behind them, or whatever it is. It's a kind of 1 foot in safety, 1 foot in risk.
Yeah, we still appreciate familiarity, I guess, but
yeah,
the unexpected is part of what gets us excited too.
Yeah. Do you find too that's like, if you go too far either direction, it's unsatisfying?
Yeah, because, well, I get this thing when I'm writing music, and this is more, I think, like ego and insecurity tapping in. But if I'm doing something that's too predictable, been done too often, I get like uncomfortable with it. And I think there's definitely a thing in my head saying like, this is not intelligent enough.
Right.
However, a lot of times when I kind of let go of that, I find some of my favorite stuff I come up with is rooted in some sort of familiar idea or something simple that I've
Right.
just twisted a little bit.
Yeah. A lot of pop songs, a lot of like big number one hit pop songs are almost nursery rhymes
Yeah.
in their simplicity, just like chum 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 chum. There's like 1 4 5.
Hmm.
Sorry, 4 1 5, and these little do re mi melodies,
Hmm.
and that's the big hit. And
Yeah.
there's like that artist has done 100 other songs that are way more interesting, but the one that's as simple as the nursery rhyme is the one that everybody likes.
Yeah. And I know I'm like that too. There's definitely music that I know is more intellectually stimulating that
Right.
I've sat down and forced myself to enjoy.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it's the simple, pop song that gets me, or the classic, maybe a Beatles song or something that just.
It's funny. I'd never thought about this before. I think a lot about deep happy versus shallow happy.
Mhm.
That deep happy is setting out to achieve something really difficult. You may be miserable while doing it, but damn, when you're done, that's a deep happy feeling.
Right.
Shallow happy can just be sitting there with ice cream watching TV,
Mhm.
And deep happy is ultimately more satisfying than shallow happy. So I think about this stuff a lot. And I have a 7-year-old kid, and I teach him a lot about the difference between deep happy and shallow happy. And I was
Uh-huh.
so you can never tell if they're listening sometimes, but it was really satisfying when it just out of the blue, like we hadn't talked about deep happy versus shallow happy in a few months, and he came back from school one day and he goes, "Dad, there's a new kid in school." I said, "Oh, cool." And he said, "And he's really cool." So I taught him about the difference between deep happy and shallow happy. I was like,
Wow.
"What?" Anyway, but okay, so I hadn't thought of this until you just said it. Like smart happy versus dumb happy, being like, you can listen to some really complex piece of music that because you're a trained musician and you understand what that composer did there, and you can appreciate the nuances of how much work it took to put together that arrangement or whatever it may be, that can be like smart appreciation,
Hmm.
smart enjoyment. But then there's just that thing where you just put on a dumb, fun AC/DC song and you're just like, fuck yeah, this is a good song.
Yeah.
And it can just be like dumb appreciation, which isn't to mean it's a bad thing. It's just like, you don't need to be smart to appreciate how good this is. You don't need to be smart to appreciate this, but there is a different layer of that like smart appreciation of something when it's like using what you've been trained in to appreciate the nuances that most people probably can't appreciate. But then as a creator, if you're only creating things that scratch your deep satisfaction or your smart creator itch, then you can't really expect many people to appreciate those
That's a
things
good
too,
point.
except your fellow craftsmen.
Hmm. That's the feeling I get when I stand in front of a group of 15-year-olds and try to get them to read Shakespeare.
Oof.
I can appreciate it and I can enjoy it on that deep, happy level. But I always tell them, I'm like, listen, this is great literature. It's really well written. You'll learn a lot, and there's a lot of great themes. But I'm not going home and reading this for fun. I'm studying it.
Right.
I'm digging, as you say, to keep that kind of metaphor going. You have to do some work to get something out of it. So when they say,
Right.
"Do you really enjoy this, Mr. Funk?" I'm like, I have to stop and say, in a way, it's like I enjoy conquering it and digging out the
Yeah.
gold, but yeah, it's heady and it's almost like exercise to find the fun in it.
This is a fun thing to talk about. I hadn't really thought about that so much. Like even just, you're right, like something like reading Shakespeare or listening to a Bartok string quartet. You're like, man, this is dissonant as fuck, but wow, this is some interesting stuff going on in here.
Hmm.
And yeah, enjoyment, yeah, but on a different, yeah, you're right, like a digging deeper kind of level. That's really funny. Until whatever 5 minutes ago, I hadn't thought about this similarly between these two things, that the deep happy things in life when you set out to achieve something difficult, and that even something like listening to music can have a deep happy versus shallow happy aspect to it, or literature. Yeah. Wow.
Maybe there needs to be a little suffering in your happiness.
Yeah. Or I mean, let's say there's we shouldn't say needs to be, but there's a place for that. It's a different level of satisfaction as a creator too, because I guess we've all, probably anybody listening to this has had it happen where you create something that is so clever, or complicated, and you're really proud of it, and you play it for your friends, and they go, I don't know, dude, it just doesn't work for me. And you're just like, well, fuck it, I like it. Because you know that it was like fun to make it or figure out how to do that, but other people don't like it. Anyway.
That's like art that requires an instruction manual on how to enjoy it.
Right.
You're not going to like this unless you understand these key components. But I guess that's good for academics and stuff.
Yeah. God, sorry. This is a funner subject than I counted on. I'm even thinking I like computer programming. I enjoy it. I do it I actually like bounce out of bed in the morning to get back to what I was programming the night before. And I was thinking, even in programming, there are easy languages and hard languages. And there's a computer programming language called Haskell that real computer nerds say like, oh man, Haskell is like the deepest thing. Like, man, once you go to Haskell, you can't come back. No other language can compare. And I almost wonder if it's the equivalent of Bartok string quartets or something, like it's hard to appreciate, but if you really get into it, it's like a deeper level of, it's a deeper happiness.
Some modular synthesis.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess there's something to be said for that. And if you can maybe realize that you're going after deep happiness while you're doing it, maybe that process will be more enjoyable.
Right.
Through the suffering.
Right. Almost like one of these dichotomy spectrums, or whatever you want to call it, where, people who are introverts are often told that they're shy, or told that they're no fun, or teased for wanting to go home early or skip a party or whatever. And it's not until you have this term, introvert, extrovert, that you can kind of justify it in your head and go, okay, it's not that I'm no fun. It's not that I'm shy. Not that I'm timid. It's just like, an hour at a party is enough for me. I don't need 6 hours at the party. After 1 hour, I'm done. And you can kind of rationalize. No, not rationalize it. What am I saying? You can understand it better in your own head if you've kind of got these labels to put on it and categorize it that way. And yeah, you're right. Maybe this like deep happy versus shallow happy, when it comes to even creating something complicated, or listening to something, or reading something complicated, you can understand it. It's like, okay, I'm doing a difficult deep happy thing now. But if at any point it becomes too difficult, maybe I just need to go put on some AC/DC and eat some ice cream for a bit to, before I come back to
balance that out a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. I need a better example than AC/DC. I heard some AC/DC last night, and I had that moment where I was like, damn, man, this is fun. Anyway.
Well, yeah, I think that's an important way to enjoy music. It doesn't have to be, something that challenges you all the time. And I think AC/DC, I think, is actually a good example, because it's you can enjoy it kind of like viscerally. You just feel it, and the energy will get you. You don't have to think about it. And when you do look at it, you can start to dissect the guitar playing, and then, you're starting to get into a deeper level there.
Yeah.
But maybe not lyrically. I mean, it's kind of, it's what it is. And
honestly, not even guitar-wise. Yeah, there's some little solos, but whatever. It's like, it's just straight ahead. But yeah, and same with some of those classic pop songs. You listen to some extremely well-written, well-crafted songs from the 1960s. Oh, here's an example I was just thinking of. I've never been a big fan of the Police, but I remember like Sting, Andy Summer, and what's the drummer's name?
Stuart Copeland.
Good, thank you. They were all very accomplished musicians that could play very sophisticated music. And some of those, if you listen to like album tracks on old Police albums, they did some pretty complex stuff. But then they would have this simple song like Every Breath You Take or whatever. And they'd say, okay, this is what we're doing now. Like we're just doing a doom, 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 like just a dead simple. That's kind of what I meant. Like that's like a nursery rhyme song for me. It's like dead simple, skip all the complexity and just get right to the point. And yeah.
You know what I'd say about that song is there's almost nothing, when I think about it, it's kind of one of those like perfectly written songs too. There's really nothing to change. It takes you through all the parts. It goes, verse, chorus. It's got a nice little bridge, but it's
You
almost
sound like a realtor. And we got a kitchen, we got a bedroom, you got it. Here's your bathroom. Got a
it's
verse,
funny you
chorus.
say that. My
Nice little
brother
bridge.
growing up, my brother is a big Police fan growing up, so I was exposed to a lot
okay.
of, and he's now a realtor too.
Funny.
Yeah, it's a funny connection that just happened there. But I think there are certain songs too that are just like crafted so well, and they just work. They run well. It's like a reliable car almost.
I love well-crafted pop songs. No matter how sophisticated my other tastes, like my two favorite kinds of music to listen to these days are Debussy and traditional Persian music. There's a streaming station called Radio Darvish, and I just put it on quietly in the background when I'm doing other things. And I just love having this like traditional Persian music streaming. And it's just kind of it's almost, to me, it's like somebody in the next apartment is cooking something really interesting. It just kind of wafts into my home. But besides those things, man, I'm always a sucker for a well-crafted pop song. And friends are sometimes surprised when they, like a Britney Spears comes on. I'm like, oh, hell yeah. And they're like, what? How are you into Britney Spears? I'm like, because it's the Hit Me Baby One More Time is a pop masterpiece.
Yeah.
It's a perfectly crafted song. And they just look at me weird. I'm like, yeah. Because I mean, most non-musicians, they kind of hear the surface. They hear the production, or they hear the artist image. They think of who Britney Spears is and what she's done in her life. But I'm just listening to the crafted melody. I forget who wrote that song, but I heard it was like originally pitched to TLC, and they said no, so it was given to this little unknown teenager named Britney. So yeah, when I'm listening to a song like "Hit Me, Baby, One More Time," I'm probably listening more to whoever this unknown creator producer is. Unless I wonder if that was Max Martin. Anyway,
that's an interesting choice. I think I was about 17 or 18 when that song came out.
Yeah,
and a band I really loved at the time called Travis did a cover of that.
Right, I remember that.
And the acoustic cover, and they made a comment, before they played it, like, this is a good song. Like you take away the pop, and the icon of Britney Spears,
exactly,
and look at it for what it is. It is a beautiful song. They did a really cool version of it, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And it's almost funny to hear it taken with all that stuff taken out of it.
Yeah,
then you get to just see it for what it is.
When I made a living as a musician, I did about 1,000 shows at colleges around the U.S. For a few years. I did the university gig circuit, and I do a lot of covers. I would kind of do like a 3-hour set, which would be like 2 hours of covers and 1 hour of originals. And the only cover songs I would do is where I could take something that you would never expect a guy on guitar to do. So I would do like a lot of female pop songs. So do like an old Cyndi Lauper and then TLC and Alanis Morissette or whatever. But always switching it up. So it's like you'd start playing the song and people would say, "It sounds a little familiar," but you'd never recognize it right away. You'd have to like get into the verse for a while before people go, "Oh my God, is he doing? Oh wow, weird." Yeah. Like the Travis example.
Yeah. Well, something funny happens when you take a song and you change the gender of the person singing it, or the age, or the any of those kind of aspects really can flip it on its head. And again, this is something I've thought about, I guess, through like teaching English, is you don't always want to confuse the narrator with the author. because I could write a story from the perspective of a 7-year-old girl, right? I can do that as a
Mm,
man. I might not understand it very well, but that doesn't mean whoever's singing the song or whoever's the character in the song is the person that wrote it or the
right,
and what you said about Britney Spears is we tend to just like we can't unstick the two. I get this feeling a
right,
lot with movies with some famous actors where I can't really see the character Tom Cruise is playing. I can only see Tom Cruise, and he's the one
right.
chasing the car. And
Yep,
I think he does a lot of
exactly.
his stunts too, so it's kind of fair to say that about him. But I see the
Yeah,
superstar. I don't always see the character.
right. And yeah, and then there's some actors it's hard to not know. Yeah, it's hard to not know that's Brad Pitt, that's Leonardo DiCaprio. But on the other hand, there's some actors, I think his name is Oscar Isaac. Um, dude, I watched like 4 different movies that Oscar Isaac was in and didn't realize that it was the same guy.
Hmm.
I think he did, what is it called? Llewellyn Davis or something like that. Like he plays like a folk musician in Greenwich Village, and he's the star of the movie. And then next movie, he plays like a superhero villain where he's in like the big thing, and I didn't recognize it was him. And then he was in Ex Machina, where again he's like the main character, but he actually looks like this. He's like shaved head and a beard.
Yeah.
Again,
Okay.
recognize it as the same guy. And then he was in the new Star Wars movies as the pilot named Poe. And again, I was like, oh, who's that actor? And then I looked him up on IMDb. I was like, oh shit, that's the Llewellyn Davis folk. Oh my god! And that's also, and it's, I love it when an actor can really disappear into the roles.
Hmm.
So speaking of this musically, you just made me think. Sorry, what were the 2 words that you said? The narrator versus the author.
Yes.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, I like that. The I hadn't thought about the term the narrator, but it's something that I don't know of any contemporary musicians that are doing a different narrator voice. But back in the 70s, I think, Randy Newman was infamous for being, uh, for writing songs where he wasn't the narrator.
Hmm.
So he was the author of the song and he was the one singing it, but he wasn't singing it as himself. He was singing it as someone else. So I think he had this hit in the 70s. I think this was him. And again, sorry if this isn't, if I got it wrong, but called Short People. And it was ended up being a big hit song, but I think the lyrics were like, short people got no reason to live. And people were mad at him, like, Randy Newman, how dare you say that? And he goes, no, no, no. I was just writing the song from the perspective of like a really prejudiced person that thinks that short people have no reason to live.
Hmm.
And people would have a really hard time wrapping their head around that because we just assume, like you just said about Britney Spears, that like we assume that if somebody's up on stage with a microphone, we know the routine here. This is a singer expressing their personal feelings through a public address system.
Hmm.
That's how this works. And people don't get up. Musicians aren't acting. Yeah, we just assume that musicians aren't acting.
Right.
And I guess David Bowie confused that a bit too, except
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
would he would do it almost in that Oscar Isaac kind of way. Well, I guess we knew it was David Bowie, but he would make you believe that this is who he is now artistically. He'd put on the Ziggy Stardust makeup and like he would be the Ziggy Stardust David Bowie for a few years, and then he'd put on a suit and be this other guy, and we'd think, oh, this is just who he is now,
Hmm.
and then he just deliberately change who he is, and um, yeah, narrator persona. I don't feel anybody. By the way, if I'm wrong and there's somebody that is putting on personas and playing narrator, if you're listening to this, please email me and tell me so, because I would love to discover some.
I wouldn't be surprised if there are a lot of people doing things like that. Maybe even I don't know if I just pictured Marilyn Manson, for instance. I don't know if that's a
Right,
character or that's an interesting one too, I guess, where
right. But even that, I mean, like that's even Marilyn Manson at this point, that's like 20 years ago, right?
mm,
So
yeah, true.
I don't know if there's somebody currently famously doing it. So yes,
Hmm.
listeners, please let us know.
Yeah, I find a lot of times I do like to approach writing songs from perspectives I might not have ever been in. And I sometimes get stressed out that this will be interpreted as me.
Yep.
Like this,
Hmm.
no, I'm not upset in our relationship. I'm totally cool with it.
Right.
I'm, I'm feeling for this situation and what it might be like. And it's fun to put yourself in there and just explore it a little. I think that's a cool way to write songs, is to just kind of live that life a little bit.
Yes. Did you ever see an artsy film called 32 Short Films about Glenn Gould?
No.
I highly recommend anybody listening to this, go find this movie. This is one of those like deep happy things. If you're a musician,
Okay.
you'll get this movie. And if you're not, you won't. 32. So the film is actually called 32 Short Films about Glenn Gould.
Mhm.
And the reason it's called this is because so he was a Canadian classical pianist in the 1950s and 60s that was known to be one of the best ever. And his uh, thing that he was most famous for was doing Bach's Goldberg variations, which I think might be 32 variations on a theme. And so that's why it's 32 short films about Glenn Gould. So inside this one 90-minute movie are 32 tiny little snippets, almost like 32 different little pieces. And I wouldn't be surprised if they match up to the Goldberg variations in some way that I'm unaware of. But it was a great movie about the creative process, because it's also slightly fictionalized, but basically true story about Glenn Gould. About it shows you how. Sorry, it's like biographical snippets of his life, but played by somebody. But it showed you how he started out as a traditional concert pianist, and he would go tour and do the things. And at a certain point, he said, "I don't like this relationship
Hmm.
of I'm sitting on a stage and a few thousand people are sitting in uncomfortable chairs watching me do it. I don't like this 1 to thousands relationship. I'd prefer that music was a one-on-one relationship directly from me to the listener." So he quit touring, quit the stage, and only did recordings for the rest of his life, which of course purists were furious about. And then what I love is he said he went beyond that to say, ideally, I think the listener to artist relationship should be a 1 to 0 relationship, where we don't even know who the artist is. The relationship is really between the listener and the music. I
Hmm.
wish we could remove the performer, the artist, even the writer from this, so you could just be somebody enjoying music, not the stuff around it.
Hmm.
So you can see where I'm going with all this.
Yeah.
Like the stuff we're talking about. Like, you wish that you could write a song expressing an emotion or a point of view that is not Brian Funk's point of view, but you're kind of worried that you'll be scolded for doing so. Or
Oh, I've had that come up in my life.
so
What did you
yeah, I think a
mean
lot.
by that?
Right. And a lot of artists have felt that, especially, I mean, God, again, it's like the Randy Newman example at this point. It's like 40, 50 years old. But if you go back and read some of his interviews, he had to be extremely defensive because he
Hmm.
did this over and over again. He put on a few personas. I think maybe most of the songs he wrote were coming from a different, he was putting on a narrator, he was putting on a point of view, but everybody kept thinking it was him, and he kept having to defend himself, saying, no, I wrote that from a point of view. Yeah, anyway. But if you removed if the artist slash performer was anonymous, you could get rid of that entirely. Nobody would have to defend themselves because we wouldn't even know who to
Yeah.
attack.
Maybe that's why some authors use pseudonyms. And
Yep.
when
Yeah.
I was
Even
studying English literature, there's a lot of people writing about literature, the critics, the literary criticism. And there's a bunch of schools of thoughts. There's some of them that will look at any piece of literature as a product of the time it came out of. So you can't separate the two. There's others where you have to look at the author's life to consider what's being written, even if it's fiction. And then there's others where you don't look at any of that stuff, just let the words speak for themselves. I was kind of like that myself. I mean, I think it's interesting to say, give a piece of literature a read from a feminist perspective, or give it a read from all kinds of, you name it,
mhm.
But the one where you just let it speak, is I think pure in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
But the other schools of thought would argue that like you can't have pure literature. You know, there's always life experience, there's always the time and the culture and all of that stuff factor in. But
I don't know. I get the feeling that that's something we could creatively play with. Like, what if you were to record an album and then find a way to play it all in a certain style, so that it would actually sound like something done in the 1950s, like through and through convincingly sound like it's the 1950s. And then you make an artist persona, an artist name, and you even find a way to take some old photos or something so that you could put out something as a re-release
right.
of a 1950s artist. And then suddenly now you're artistically playing with that thing that you even just said about literature. Like, oh, well, it's of its time.
Mm.
But hey, we're creators. We could create something that we could use in the same way that, sorry, hold on. I'm going to make a weird comparison. But one of the things I appreciate most about electronic music is it started playing with timbre. Is that what you call it? Like, the low pass, high pass. Low pass, high pass was not a thing that you could really do on acoustic instruments so directly. And I so appreciated like electronic music is able to play with. It's like, it's like we've just taken one note in one rhythm, but just by playing with the spectrum of the frequencies that you're letting pass through, it's like you've kind of introduced a new spectrum of we've got tempo, we've got pitch, we've got this, and now we've got frequency spectrum to play with. Well, now could you imagine adding the artistic perception of time and image as another instrument you can play with as a creator? Put out something, create something that's old, create something that's done by somebody else, quote unquote.
I like that idea a lot. It's almost like throwing a new chapter in the history books, or time traveling or something. And
because we're writing the books, baby, so we can stick in chapter 6, even though we're on 68 now.
Yeah,
why not?
But that's there's a lot of fun you can have with that artistically.
Yeah,
you really you're dissecting a lot about culture, and it's also kind of like in the perspective of the rearview mirror. I think I think that could be a lot of fun to really create that like superstar of 1965 that
right.
Well, didn't they do a movie where everyone forgot the Beatles and he had to kind of it's almost like that in a way.
You're right. Yeah, that's a fun creative way to reimagine an alternate past. There's so after you two did Achung Baby and then maybe one more after that, the same guys went into the studio with Brian Eno, who produced Achung Baby, and they did something. They called themselves the Passengers, I think, and they did an instrumental album that was a soundtrack to a movie. They recorded a soundtrack album, but if you look it up and you look into it, there was no movie. They invented the movie and they made a soundtrack to a movie that never existed. And that was their creative challenge to themselves. A very Eno type thing to do. He loves those kind of things, and that's what I love about him.
Yeah.
I like his theories more than his music itself. But yeah, that was a fun way to, because if you read the liner notes of the album, it says, okay, this music is the scene where, the hero has just come back and he's walking through the fields. We see him for the first time since he's been gone. They described the scene that this piece of music was for. And that was just a fun creative exercise. So I'm going to tell you something I don't think I've ever told anybody publicly is way back in like 1995, the internet is so brand new. It's like uncommercial. Like people had email addresses, but we were still just starting to poke out and see what this thing was. I found Brian Eno's email address. And so I sent him an email and he replied, which blew my mind. But the reason he replied is because I told him an idea I had that was kind of inspired by Passengers. And so it was this. It was to make a soundtrack album to a movie that you say is coming out, but every track. So you know how soundtrack albums often work when it was like not when Trent Reznor does a soundtrack to a whole movie, when they'd have like different artists doing song. It's like the movie had picked songs from different artists, and so the soundtrack album to City of Angels or whatever would have like 15 different artists doing one track each, right? So my idea was to record a soundtrack album to be 15 different artists, but I would be all of those 15 artists, and it would be my creative challenge to make it so that you couldn't tell it was one person doing all of this. And then it would be for a movie that didn't exist. So I emailed this idea to Brian Eno, and I said, "Hey, this is inspired by you." And he replied back with an exclamation point or two, because he said that he had the same idea and thinks it would be fun, and let him know if I do it.
Yeah.
But then I accidentally started CD Baby, and things got distracted.
Things got away from that idea.
Out of hand, yeah. Oh well.
Well,
if anybody wants to do that idea, I don't think anybody's done it yet. And Brian Eno would be very happy if you did.
Yeah. Maybe he'll still reply to that email too.
Yeah.
I think this maybe brings us to one of the things we wanted to talk about a little bit, which are some of these. I heard you say, I think it was on the EDM Producer podcast, which I caught a few months back, and you were talking about doing music as like a series of exercises, a sort of like, I think you were talking about Tom Waits maybe at that point. But what if I did this with that? And sometimes maybe it seems obvious to you while you're doing it, but to another person it might come out as something totally fresh. But I was curious if you had any of those in mind, if there are any particular exercises or challenges you've tried. Maybe it's kind of like what you mentioned even with the movie soundtrack, but I was just wondering if you had any to spare and share with us as we're all trying to figure out what to do with our next piece of music.
Well, before we do, when I got your question about that, and yeah, to those of you listening, Brian sent me an email before we talked about some things we could talk about or that he was curious about. After getting your question by email, it made me think first, doesn't everybody do this? And this isn't rhetorical. I'm actually, if you don't mind, I want to ask you, Brian, about like your process. When you're sitting down to write a song, are you just going with whatever happens to flow through you? Or don't you give yourself these little, let's see what happens if kind of challenges?
Well, there's a big part of me that loves to be the free spirit when I get into the studio and just see what inspiration will hit me and try things out and play around. Often when I do that, I get nothing really accomplished. Okay. Sometimes really cool stuff happens, unexpected surprises, but I find that I'm best when I do have some kind of aim, some kind of goal.
Right.
The example that really sticks out to me more than anything, of anything I've ever worked on, was I did a project with a friend of mine where we made songs. He's a special education teacher, so he uses music a lot to guide his students around. And we made a set of songs mostly directed for kids with autism to teach them proper or acceptable social behavior. Social stories is like the tool that they use in education. And it might be a story about how to sit in a restaurant and, just behave. And we turned them into songs. So we made a bunch of songs. We have songs like 1, 2, 3, How Calm Can We Be? Quiet Hands is one.
Okay.
We've got Our Fingers Don't Belong There. There are a whole bunch of little songs that the point is to teach this lesson. And the point is not to be artistic. That was a relief too, what we talked about earlier, being intelligent. We just got to throw that away because that's not the point. In fact, we want the songs to be kind of simple and nursery rhyme, memorable. And what blew me away about that project, I think we did 11 songs. And it was just so easy. Like everything came so easy. The lyrics came easy, the structure of the song, the recording. I mean, it was just a real project that was just like rolling a ball down the hill. And we had that aim. We had that very specific goal for everything. I think when I show up with an idea, the more well-formed the idea, the more productive I tend to be. And, you know where you're going.
Right. And why? Like I think that's the other thing you said there is you knew why you were
Why,
doing
yeah.
this. You had a specific aim, whereas like when we sit down to kind of like, hey, I think I'm gonna write a song, or maybe a lot of the mental labor we do is figuring out like, what am I doing here? What's the purpose of this? What's the point of this song? Yeah.
I think it's good to think about what the audience is going to be doing when your song is on.
Mm.
Are they dancing at the club? Are they, getting over a breakup? What are they doing? So I'm doing a thing that a lot of people are doing right now called January. And the idea is to just record yourself jamming like a little piece of music and share it. And you're supposed to do it every day. And it's surprisingly challenging. And it's also surprisingly easy when you commit to it. Like you
Mm.
have the time, but you have to, you know, suck it up and do it.
Yeah.
I've done it a few days where I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And there's some days when I had a structure, but the best days I've had, I'd say, were when I was trying to just create music for people that are either going to sleep, meditating, or maybe studying, and it's just this sort of ambient drone type of music. Maybe because that is a little bit easier than writing complex melodies and stuff. But all of the action in that kind of music happens in the timbre, in the filtering, in the
Mm-hmm.
tones. It's not rhythmic, and it's really not very melodic. But in order to keep it interesting, there's subtle shifts in tones and stuff like that. And I had a very specific idea, and I did that for 4 of the days, and I came up with 4 tracks that I liked. Um, but I had the idea in mind. This is why you're going to put this on. This is what
Yeah.
it's for, and these are my parameters too. These are my limitations. I'm not going to be doing any drums or anything rhythmic or really melodies. It's just going to kind of flow in notes.
Right.
But that was
Cool.
very specific.
Well, then, even musically, do you ever sit down with a really specific thing, like you heard a certain melodic interval or phrase that inspires you, and so you sit down like, I want to do something like that melody, and you sit down with that aim of making something like that melody?
Yeah. That's what happened to me last night. Actually, it was I was listening to the Jesus and Mary chain,
Mm-hmm.
and I was just enjoying how simple their progressions were. I mean, I could listen to it and probably know the progressions just because they're so familiar. 1/4, 1/5,
Mm-hmm.
and but I was also really impressed with how enjoyable it was. The simple melodies and just the drenched guitars and distortion. But
Mm-hmm.
what I came up with wasn't really in that vein.
Right.
I went into it with that in mind, but
Yeah.
it wound up being acoustic and really quiet, but with fairly simple chords with a little spice here and there. Um, so sometimes it's like just knowing you have a target is helpful, even
Yep.
if you totally miss it with your
Yeah.
arrow, whatever.
Well, I
You'll
don't think
hit
of it as
something.
not necessarily missing it, but I love this concept that we are imperfect mirrors.
Hmm.
That even if you're trying to imitate something, you can't because you're warped. You are warped in your own particular Brian Funk way.
Yeah.
So that even if you tried to completely imitate whatever song by whatever artist, it's never going to sound exactly like them. It's still going to it's going to have your own bent to it.
Hmm. That idea has comforted me a lot because I think when I first started with music, a lot of it's imitation. I mean, I learned guitar off of Nirvana and all
Mm-hmm.
the alternative grunge rock that was happening at the time. And there was always like a fear, like you're just copying what you're, learning from, and then
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that's very true. But I think even when you try to copy things, like you said, you're one way or another going to screw it up and make it your
Mm-hmm.
own.
Yeah, or you could do a very kind of academic copy of something, right? So when I was a teenager into guitar, I learned all of my favorite guitar solos note for note, and I could sit there with a recording and play along and exactly imitate all of these guitar solos. And then later, as I got my own little home studio and I was learning production, a few times, yeah, I would set out to imitate this Prince song or whatever.
Mm.
Every instrument of it. I think it especially, Prince was inspiring to me because I knew that he played all of the instruments on his own recordings. So I'm like, okay, if he can do it, I can do it. So I would sit down and reproduce the entire arrangement or the entire recording of a Prince song. And then that one would sound like him, but that was an academic exercise. To clone something, to learn it. And even some writers do that. Going back to like Benjamin Franklin, they say in his autobiography, he said he got good at writing by copying writers he liked. And he would literally handwrite their essay over again just to kind of feel his hand writing those words and then figure out why he liked it. But just so it started to feel natural for these well-formed sentences to be flowing out of his pen. So that's a different thing. But what I find most interesting, my favorite thing to do is, two favorite things to do. But one of them is to take the technique of some music you like and figure out what is it about that melody you like. It's a certain melodic leap, or it's a way that it jumps in a sixth here and then falls and then goes and jumps in another sixth there. And you think, and if you really break it down, you could say, that's what I like about that melody. It's like, does that sixth, then, and does that sixth. That's what kind of makes it cool and repetitive, but not. And so then you go write a new melody using 2 sixths. The jump, and you're not imitating that melody, but you're imitating what you liked about it. You're imitating the technique that made it good. Same thing with if you notice that there's some arrangements, song-wise. I still call it arrangement. I think arrangement and production can be kind of intertwined, but I often think of arrangements as far as just like what instruments are coming in and dropping out, right? And I found that some of my favorite arrangements were the ones where it's like, every 4 bars or so, something was changing instrumentation wise. And I've never been a fan of these things where it's just one person with a guitar just sits there and, it's a single voice and guitar for the entire song. That's never as interesting to me as the ones that, bring in a bass halfway through or drop out this or bring in a couple more things. And it can even be kind of chamber-like. It doesn't need to be a lot of instruments, just a few, but combining them in different ways is so exciting. And you can imitate an arrangement you like with a song that you wrote. And so now nobody calls it copying. You're copying an arrangement, but it's still your song, and nobody except, a fellow song arrangement crafter would realize that you copied the arrangement from another song. These are my favorite things to kind of to play. Oh, and then the other one was where you make yourself some crazy little exercise like, I wonder if I could quantize a conversation. Like, could I take this conversation between Brian and Derek and quantize it and clip it so that you can hear that they're voices, but you can't even hear the words anymore. It's like, you'd only hear things like that. And how would it go to quantize a conversation? But not oversimplify it into a 2-bar loop, but keep the voice rising and falling, and like make it a longer 32-bar kind of thing, that has the rising and falling tones and the dramatic, the dense parts and the sparse parts. And anyway, those are the kind of things I like. Can I make a drum sound like a flute and make a flute sound like a drum? Those kind of production challenges.
I think the arrangement one is a cool idea for sure. It's something I've been meaning to do for a long time, is to just make maybe you can do it with like markers in your DAW or with maybe even a MIDI clip that notifies you of changes, but just to take some pop songs with some great arrangements, whatever, and put that in your project, and it'll say like, okay, this is where the bass came in, this is where the drums came in, this is the drop or whatever, the chorus, and then kind of delete the song and then just build yours around that. I'd love to have a library of just songs I love's arrangements.
Yeah.
Something I need to sit down one day and just do. That would
We
be
should do
deep
that.
happy.
Don't you? Yeah. Don't you have stuff like that on your site? Well, I saw through your site these kind of like Ableton libraries. One of them was like Costco cash registers or something, right? And
Yeah.
so that would be amazing to kind of say, like, hit arrangements minus the music or something like that. Like put your drums, now put your bass here, now put your guitar here.
Yeah.
We're not even going to tell you what song this came from, but follow these. That's a funny kind of like halfway paint by numbers. That's like color by numbers, but we're not going to tell you what colors.
Right. You can't tell what you're painting.
Put something here, put the same color here at those 4 different number 1 spots, and then something here in those 7 different number 3 spots. But we're not going to tell you what it originally came from. Let's see how it turns out.
Yeah. Well, I use Ableton Live, as you know, I guess.
Oh, really?
Have I made that clear to everybody? And one of the reasons I use it is because they have that session view. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, but the session view is where I think of it as the palette. That's where you put all your paints. And then the arrangement is where you go to the canvas and put your paints on the canvas. I've always felt my whole life, I can come up with a bunch of like cool parts on my guitar, cool sections of songs, but I was never so sure how to put them together. I would usually need the band together and we'd have to like play them and move them around. But what I love about live is you can put those parts in there and then sort of just play them, jam on them, and switch between them. And I find a lot of the writing I do, especially when I play these songs live, is I have my sections and then I just kind of jam on it. And just after a while, the arrangement starts to blossom. It starts to just show up and it makes sense.
Cool. I like that a lot.
Because you can stay in that session view and never commit to anything, it's very easy to never finish anything. You have these like 90% done songs, but you can't decide if that intro should be 4 bars or if that intro should not even happen. So I like the idea of having these like kind of prescribed arrangements, because I think that's for me anyway, and from what I've seen with a lot of people, I get stuck at deciding like where to go and what to do. And the faster I can get my paint on the canvas instead of just keep making more paint, the more likely I am to finish. So I need the guides.
Yeah, which is funny because the guides could. Sorry, hold on. I'm going to make a weird comparison here, but
Let's do.
If you have a friend with a messy garage or a house, it would be much easier for you to go to that friend's house and go, okay, get rid of this, because you've got no emotional attachment.
Yes.
He's got, so it's always easier for an outsider to come in and say, no, right, we're going to get this done now. We're going to give ourselves 2 hours and this can be done. So that's a good argument in favor of like a co-producer coming in and saying, all right, Brian, good ideas. We're going to get this all wrapped up in an hour. I'm going to help you make some of these decisions. So, but then it's unrealistic for us to all get a co-producer. So you're right. It's like, in a way, a session view templates where you just saying, just do it this way. Just commit to it. Yes, there are an infinite number of ways you could arrange and rearrange and rearrange and remix your stuff, but do this one, do it like this, and then call it done. That would be a great way to help people finish their unfinished stuff. Help make that help take the decision away from them. Sorry, I ran across this idea a couple days ago in a book I was reading about Japan. It's called The Beginner's Guide to Japan by Pico Iyer. And he lives in Japan with his Japanese wife, but he doesn't speak Japanese and he's never got a resident visa. He's lived there for 32 years on a tourist visa, coming in and out. And he does that on purpose because he says it keeps him inquisitive about the culture. He's never fools himself for a minute to think that he actually understands anything about Japan. He just continues to observe for 32 years now. And he said, one thing I've observed is how it's considerate to take the decisions for somebody. So he said, when my wife says, where do you want to eat tonight? And I say, anywhere you want to eat. He said, I think I'm being considerate by letting her choose, but actually, the more considerate thing is to just say, here, I'm taking you out to this place. I'll tell you when we get there. And to just take care of everything is actually more considerate, because most of us feel the weight or the burden of making decisions. And if somebody takes that burden away from you, you appreciate it. So yeah, again, session view templates. Just do it like this. Just trust me. We'll take this burden away from you of deciding how the final arrangement should go.
That's a great comparison, really. I can't tell you how many times I've been in that situation. I don't know. What do you want to do? I don't know.
Yeah.
No, it's up to you, anything you want. And I just want you to pick.
Yeah. I mean, you know about Brian Eno's, what are they called?
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Oblique strategies.
Yes. I was struggling with that name very recently myself, which
cool.
I thought was kind of funny.
Yeah, everybody listening to this, if you don't already know about Brian Eno's oblique strategies, just go search the web. You'll find it. It's your cultural imperative to understand Brian Eno's oblique strategies and keep a copy of them and turn to them occasionally as you're producing music. And the whole idea was it would be a deck of cards that tells you what to do when you get stuck on anything, you're supposed to shuffle the deck and pick out one, and you have to do what it says, whether you think it's a good idea or not. Yeah. But they're ambiguous. Like one of them would say, cut the cord, or now double it, or something like that. They're ambiguous enough that you could apply it to whatever kind of music you're doing in whatever way that it means something to you.
Yeah, I think there's a website somewhere that will randomly generate one of them for you. So you just reload the page, and it's like, boom, start at the beginning.
It should be. Yeah, make it a bookmark on your phone's browser, so you can just grab your phone if you're stuck and hit that button, and it'll give you a random command. So, sorry, you asked earlier about other little musical challenges. I don't claim to be a fountain of these or have better ideas than anybody else, but I'll just give some examples, and I think you can come up with your own better than I can. But for example, I like the challenge of, say, like, write a lyric using only nouns and no verbs. But
like that.
Still have it be interesting with an emotional impact. Like, can I make an emotional impact and write a lyric that has meaning without verbs? Just nouns. Maybe you're allowed adjectives. Definitely not adverbs. Then another one would be take like a classic melody, something, a great melody, whether it's Paul McCartney's Yesterday or Over the Rainbow from Wizard of Oz or whatever it is, like some amazing classic timeless melody, and reverse it. Like whether it's maybe play the MIDI notes and then flip the MIDI notes. I think there must be some command where you can select and then flip.
Yeah.
So inverse it in pitch or reverse it in time or both. And now make it your own. Like actually keep it as is. And I don't think that counts as a copyright nick or whatever. I don't think it would be considered stealing. I think it's a unique melody if you do this. And then use it. Like that, put your own lyrics to it or keep it instrumental or whatever, but like reverse a classic melody. Another one would be to cover a song that's completely out of your realm. So we talked earlier about the what was it, the Britney Spears example, but I was thinking about what it would be like now in 2020 plus to take something that's just not in pop culture anymore, like that 70s music that's just disappeared, like Supertramp or Steely Dan, or like a 1920s pop song, something that just like nobody listens to anymore. Nobody's aware of the song. And like go back and find hit songs from the 1920s or 1930s and do a cover version of one of those that appeals to you a lot. Or something that's just like way out of your usual realm, something from 80s metal or something like that. If you're like, electronic music artist, you do something from 80s metal that nobody would ever think that, an electronic artist would be covering a song by Quiet Riot. or something, like something just way out of your realm, and then make it as unlike the original as possible. Then sometimes there's the creative challenge to do many things on one subject. Like, can I write 10 songs about food? Like, okay, any of us could probably come up with one song about food. Could you actually write 10 songs about food? And if your answer is no, well, then why not? Isn't that a challenge right there?
Well, think about how that would focus you if you were to do that. Sorry to interrupt, but just to jump in. Like, because if I'm going to write a song about food, I might talk about dessert and breakfast. But if I have to do 10, I'm going to cherry pie. But that's been done, I guess, right? She's my cherry pie. Well, but you know what I'm saying? Like, now you have to get granular and get into the detail. You might talk about eating at a restaurant, having an appetizer there. And then in the next one, it could be about grilled cheese sandwiches.
Right.
Instead of just food.
Or push yourself to, like, kind of like I said earlier with the, using only nouns and not verbs and still trying to have an emotional impact. How could I write 10 songs about food that are actually worth listening to, that are actually good lyrics, that have an emotional impact, that take the listener somewhere, that stir the emotions, that aren't just me listing kitchen items? Like that's like a writing challenge that goes beyond, like, just being clever. It's like, well, now you gotta, if you're aiming to actually have an emotional impact, this is like the biggest challenge of people that are really out there writing screenplays, novels, whatever. It's like, it's not enough to just say, hey, look, I did a screenplay. It's like, no, you're trying to make the person in the movie theater cry, like, that's a real challenge, to make somebody cry. Like, how can I make somebody cry with my writing? And how can I do that with a song about food? Right. So then lastly, another idea is to collaborate with somebody really unlikely, like, use the internet to find a musician on SoundCloud that lives across the world from you. You find a musician that's in Ethiopia doing a certain style that's, like, way different from yours. But if you like it, you contact them and you're like, hey, I live in Long Island. I'm doing this electronic music. Yes, I know that you're playing this, like, traditional Syrian music or whatever, but what if we collaborated? Let's try to do something together. I think that could just open you up if you're doing a real 50-50 collaboration, and not just saying, here, play this. It's a different thing. And I'm not talking about, like, hiring a musician to play their instrument on your thing. That's not a collaboration, that's a sideman. But to actually do a real collaboration with somebody that's very different from you, and especially like across the world, would be amazing. Or even if it's not across the world, I mean, man, imagine collaborating with, like, a gospel music artist or a country music artist or a thrash punk band or something like that. And you're going to collaborate with them and do something 50-50 if they find it worth their time too. Would be really creatively opening.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Think of all the alternate ways of working you would come across, and methods, and just philosophies about what music should be.
Yeah.
Very eye-opening.
Anyway, this is the kind of shit that I just find it endlessly interesting. This is, like, to me, like, being a musician is just endlessly interesting. It's not about the fame, the money, the whatever. It's like, this stuff in itself is my favorite thing, man. When years ago, Brian Eno wrote an autobiography that was called A Year. A publisher paid him to keep a daily diary for a year, and at the end of the year, they would publish it. And it was while he was doing the Achung Baby album. And it was interesting reading about how U2's album Achung Baby came about. But my favorite thing, I mean, besides hearing his interesting thoughts about producing music, was that when the album was done, he had a week off, and then he went straight into producing the next album by Coldplay or something like that. So it's like, he's just staying in this creative mode at all times. Whereas the band U2, when that album was done, well, now they had to put together the tour, and now it was time for them to go on tour for like 3 years to perform those same 16 songs every night for 3 years. Like, oh God, that sounds miserable. What a terrible job. I have to go play the same songs on stage every night. That sounds awful. But being in the studio and like constantly challenging yourself to come up with these creative challenges, that's the interesting stuff to me.
Yeah. And it's funny how there are really endless ideas you can come up with, endless challenges, but it's very hard to to jump on those when you actually get in the moment, to just commit to it. I think this, I've said this on the podcast before, I think that this is the modern creative person's real challenge, is just there's endless opportunity and possibility and choices, that it's so important to just, you need some kind of filter or funnel to get rid of a lot of that.
Yeah. That's what I like about this challenge approach is, to me, man, especially once you've got interesting synths and whatever, it's just too unlimited. It's like the only way you're going to do anything is to limit yourself. But I think of it as like the modern problem with like, there are too many distractions online. There's too much sugar in the food store, whatever it is. Like in every way we have to limit ourselves in order to get by in this world, so it's setting limitations it can be very freeing in a way.
Yeah. That's something you do a lot, I noticed in your writing. Even you have almost this like on your blog I'm talking about, it's almost like the Derek Sivers like field manual of how you live your life. So many just things you've thought about and kind of eliminated decisions for yourself in advance. And one that like struck me was the one you sent me when I asked you about coming on the show, is you said, well, here, read this, and it's about being a slow thinker. And, and it's about taking your time and not being afraid to say, I don't know. And I think me as a teacher, I've experienced this a lot. I'm the teacher, of course I have to know. So you're tempted to just barf up an answer when someone asks you a question. But I found by saying I don't know, it humanizes me, for one, and I'm off the hook now in the future for a lot of other things. But it gives you the chance to actually consider what you're going to say and not just jump in.
Yeah. After I posted that article, somebody in the comments was a salesman in India who read it saying, yes, but I'm in sales. And so what do I do when I'm visiting a client to sell my product and they ask me a question that I don't know the answer to? I can't just say, I don't know. And my reply was, absolutely, yes, you can. In fact, I think that would be really impressive if a salesman was trying to sell you, whatever, a corporate software package, and I ask you a question about it, and instead of, spitting out some BS right away, instead you say, that's a good question. I'm not sure. But you know what? I'm going to jot that down and I'm going to find out the real answer for you. And I'll let you know later this week as soon as I find out the answer. I think that would be more impressive to a customer than somebody barking out an immediate answer. Kind of like, in general, I think it's like we think that we're supposed to always have the immediate answer to everything, but in a way it's more impressive to admit that you don't know, because that kind of implies that you're not going to flap your lips unless you do know. You're not going to waste someone's, brain or air filling it with nonsense that you're going to find out, and you let them know when you really do know.
I mean, imagine if a politician would say that.
Right.
Just admit, like, I really don't know.
That's a good question. I'll find out, and I'll let you know when I know.
Yeah, it's I guess counterintuitive in a way. You want to seem like you know what you're doing, but
right. But then the counterintuitive thing is, it actually kind of proves you to be smarter.
Yeah, right.
If you say, that's a good question, I actually don't know, I'll find out. It shows that you're thinking, not just, having a knee-jerk reaction.
You don't think you know everything already. That's
right.
Nice to know, right?
I think there's probably some like Socrates type of quote about like wisdom comes from knowing that you don't know, or something like that.
Yeah, and I think Einstein said something along the lines of, "The more I know, the more I realize I don't know."
All right.
That kind of idea.
Sorry, I laughed when you said Einstein because I thought you were doing that thing where it's like on the internet, anybody can make up a quote and put, dash dash Albert
Yeah.
Einstein, or what was his name? Sorry, who wrote Tom Sawyer?
Oh, Mark Twain?
Mark
Yeah.
Twain gets attributed to everything. Oscar Wilde gets attributed.
Yeah.
Einstein, Socrates,
I went
Abraham
through
Lincoln.
that recently with a Mark Twain quote with my class, and I said, I think he said this, but the point is not who said it.
Right.
The point is the wisdom behind it.
Yeah.
But
Anyway,
yeah.
thanks for a fun conversation. I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah, me too. And I think it's great stuff to think about and consider, and just the spirit of your work is always I've enjoyed a lot, because it just this idea just to question things, think about things before you do it, and don't just do it because you're supposed to do it. And
Right.
if I think people should read your book, Anything You Want.
Oh, well, thanks. But if you're going to read my book, just understand it's not going to be about the kind of things we're talking about here. The story of my book, Anything You Want, is that I never intended to write a book, but after I sold CD Baby and I learned some lessons doing so, Seth Godin, who's just a personal hero of mine, said, it just called me on the phone out of the blue and said, Derek, it's Seth Godin. I said, oh, wow, hi. And he said, I'm launching a publishing company and I want you to be my first author. Wow. I said, oh my God, okay. So I never intended to write a book, but he asked me to do that. And so Anything You Want is really just my story of how I started, grew, and sold CD Baby, and just 40 little lessons learned along the way. But but it's not about this kind of stuff. On the other hand, my next book, which is called Your Music and People, is all about music. So that's not out yet. It's actually at the printers right now. I finished writing it, but it's
congratulations.
So that one's going to be done soon. But anyway, in the meantime, anybody who's listening to this, the reason I do these interviews is not, as you can tell, I'm not here to promote anything. I just do it honestly for the people I meet, because some of the coolest people I've ever met in my life are people that find me through things like this. So if you made it all the way to the end, go to my website, go to sivers.org, and my email address is there in a big font, and I reply to every email, and I enjoy it. So introduce yourself, send me a hello, and include the link to your music, damn it. I'm blown away by how many musicians email me, and they say, oh, I'm a musician. And then they just, sign their email Dave. And I'm like, well, come on, fucker, where's your music? Give me the link. That's always my next question. So include a link to your music. I like listening while I'm answering emails. So introduce yourself.
Well, I bring up the book mostly just, it's littered with these instances of you just not doing what people say you're supposed to do, and how that leads to the success of the company. And I think
that's the musician thing, isn't it? Though it's you get to make your own game, make your own rules.
Mm-hmm. So, I think one thing we're getting at a lot with this is this idea of when enough is enough, and when things are done and finished, and when to move on, and when to try a new idea. Do you have a way of knowing when enough is? Because I think this is something that can help us with finishing songs or finishing chapters in our life.
I think it's a hard-learned lesson you learn from experience, that if you don't at some point just say this is done, then you're just not going to put anything out. Mm-hmm. You have to. You just learn over and over again that it's just a little painful, but at some point, I like that in English we use the word release, right? You release an album, you release a song. It's because some point you just got to let go of it and just say, okay, there, it's out. Of course I can improve it, and maybe I will someday, but you just have to let go of it in order to get it out there. So, I think the real anybody can dabble with things, but so few people actually get things launched that should always be your challenge, to get things launched.
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a project, a plan, a life plan, a song, a career move, whatever it is, you got to get it launched.
Just get started.
Well, get finished. No, get finished. Anybody can get started. Sorry, that was like anybody can get started. The challenge is to like get it finished. That's the hard thing. So I think that's what you got to focus on is how can I finish this? And that shapes a lot of how I work. Is I hate multitasking. I really tend to just do one thing to completion, even if it takes me months or years. I'll only do that one thing until it's done, and then I'll do the next thing. So I'm very, very like single focused like that. I don't multitask to a fault. I have to just do one thing at a time until it's done.
Well, there's all that science about we can't really multitask anyway. We're just shifting,
Right.
and I don't think I enjoy things as much when I think if you really pay attention to everything you do, you can find a way to enjoy it. I proctored a 3-hour test yesterday, and it wasn't that bad. I'm supposed to just sit there and watch students take a test, and I found a way to sort of entertain myself. I read the test. I thought about what they're trying to get at with this exam and what I could have sat there and said, this sucks. I wish I was somewhere else. I wish I was doing something else. But of course I would have had a terrible time.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert at making the best of every situation, but once in a while, you realize it when you do it. And I think it comes a lot from not wishing you were somewhere else or doing something else or being distracted with other things.
Or there's also that do it anyway, even if you're not enjoying it. So I just yesterday finished like a month-long project of, in short, refactoring my database, which it was a lot of work. I've been using the same database for like 10 or 20 years. It needed a lot of overhauls. I had to change the functions and put them into schemas. And it was a lot of like monotonous work. And it was many, many, many 12-hour days of doing this one monotonous thing. And I'd be like, oh my God, I'd like stand up and I'd just go get some caffeine. I was like, I hate this. I want to do anything else. I'm like, okay, time to get back to it. It's like, you don't even have to like it. There's some things in life. It's like, you need to do even creative things. Like there are some songs that it's like, oh man, this thing needs a fourth verse. It's got to be there. And I can't just repeat the first verse again. I got to take it somewhere else. And it's like, you can kick and scream and make noises, but it's like, just get it done. Even if you're not enjoying it, it doesn't have to be all pure pleasure, Again, deep happy versus shallow happy. There you go.
I was thinking
shallow happy is doing whatever you feel like doing now. Deep happy is shallow happy is what you want now. Deep happy is what you want most. And I think all of us, what we want most is to finish things, to launch them, to get them out there, which isn't always what you want now. I think even one of the Gershwins, Ira Gershwin, famous songwriter from long ago, I think he said, I hate writing, but I love having written. And that's a famous quote because it's a wonderful reminder that the process itself can suck.
Yeah.
But sometimes the process is fun, all the creative stuff we were talking about, but sometimes the process just sucks. But you do it because it's going to get it done. And when it's done and it's out there and people are listening to it, it's so worth it.
That's always something I like to remind people because especially when they're learning, when they're new into their music production is, it looks like fun on Instagram and it looks exciting here and there, but there's a lot of blood and sweat. and just know that that's going to happen because sometimes people, they're learning and they're like, I just thought it's just not as fun as I thought it would be. I'm like, well, it's not easy. It can be a lot of fun, but don't mistake in that. It gets tough and that can drive you crazy.
Yeah.
And like you said, there's no answer. There's no right or wrong answer, just answers.
I guess it's probably the process of becoming a better and better musician is probably the process of making quicker decisions. And I found it interesting when I found out the word decide comes, the Latin root of decide means to cut off. that when we decide something, we are cutting off the other
Mm.
options. And so it's, you especially in electronic music, you gotta make decisions. They're just way too, there are always more patches, more sounds, more, banks you can go through. You got to just make your decision and just say, okay, this is good enough. Keep going. Yeah.
Yeah. I heard one of the quotes I heard I was at Gumroad is the company I used to do all my digital distribution with my
Cool.
packs and stuff. And it was a dinner they had, which was really cool that they even did this. But they had a quote, "Enough is a decision." And I just thought that was great because,
Nice.
you decide it's enough. And sometimes you just need to decide. And that goes for making music, that goes for making money, that goes for going out to the party for an hour. It's a decision,
Yeah.
and decide, realize that it's not, you don't ever get there. You never, with making a song, this, it's not like you hit a point and like a little coin pops up on your screen and a star and it says, you did it. You're done.
Right.
Your book, right? Did you get one of those when you finished your book before you sent
Yeah,
it off?
right.
Like a little like nice sounding, video game success tune plays. It just doesn't happen. You have to make that
Yeah.
decision. Well, I thank you so much for your time. You've been very generous and very thoughtful in your answers, and I appreciate that. And actually, the other thing I meant to say is you made me very thoughtful in my approach to the process too, by being the slow thinker. Really.
Oh, thanks.
So it helped me too. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's fun the whole thing with deciding to rock my slow thinking approach is that I love going past the first idea. I think about that all the time. It's like whenever whether coming up with an idea or answering a question, the first idea that comes to mind, I think, is overrated. I think people mistakenly think that the first thing that comes to mind is somehow more authentic or more sincere.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's usually the first thing that comes to mind is thoughtless. And it's the next two or three things that come to mind that are always more interesting, more considered, digging a little deeper. So I think it's fun before having a conversation like this, how we traded a couple emails about what we could talk about.
Yeah.
Steers it into a more interesting conversation.
Yeah,
so,
let it simmer a little bit.
So thanks for that too.
Cool.
Anyway, thanks, Brian. I love this. And let's do it again someday.
That'd be great. I'm going to wrap it up. We'll wrap it up with everybody. Then we'll just finish up off the air real quick, and then we'll be on our way. So everybody, thank you for listening. Thanks to Derek, of course. Check out his website, sivers.com. It's SIV.
No, .org.
.org. Oh my God. Sorry.
That's okay. SIVERS.org.
Okay. Yes. Not .com. .org. And poke around there a little bit. There's a lot of good wisdom and nuggets and things that you can apply to a lot of aspects of your life, including music.
And send me an email and introduce yourself. That's my favorite part.
And send your music.
Yes.
I feel the same way too. When I get an email, like you used my sound. I want to hear it. Let me hear.
Yeah. I mean, come on. Every musician should just go into your Gmail settings or whatever, and include an email signature that just automatically goes out, that just has your URL at the bottom. Like, come on. It's just...
And that'll make you feel less icky if that's the problem, where you don't want to feel like you're self-promoting. It's just automatically at the bottom. You can click on it.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot, everybody, and I hope you all have a great day.